The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Well, welcome to the Spot Track Podcast. Kevin Sylvester, Paul Peck, and Mike Giannetti from SpotTrack.com. And it is just NFL heavy this week on the podcast because of the NFL trade deadline. And for the first time, I think in my lifetime, there's actually trades in the NFL. Nah, that's a little overstating it, Mike, but there's a ton of trade activity in the NFL. Why is that happening?
Yeah, it's kind of a crapshoot this time of year. You kind of never know if it's going to be, dead, nothing, or silent, or, if it's going to be interesting like this. So I think where we're at a point where these GMs, maybe a little younger, maybe a little fresher, maybe these teams are kind of coming around to using this as a way to really kind of deal with their cap during the season, either for right now or definitely for next year or for the years to come. So you've seen some major players, who are certainly going to help in terms of the football side of things, move to different teams for the next few weeks. And you've seen a lot of cap numbers kind of change in terms of the back and forth of how these trades have hashed out, and we're going to take a look at that today.
Yeah, I think it's just the evolution of the Moneyball era that we're in relating to all sports, Mike, where the GMs have grown up to see it in other sports and are starting to think like those, like the Moneyball era got us all thinking about sports.
Right, and what we've got a hockey situation, right? We've got teams who need to kind of take, week 6, week 7 and identify, am I a buyer, am I a seller? And that kind of dictates where they are in terms of this trade deadline week. So, we've seen some surprises for sure. We've seen, big names move, big positions move, which is really what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, it's a situation where maybe teams are coming around to the fact that, we can be out of it week 8 and that's okay. We can make ourselves better.
Yeah, it's interesting to use the Nhl analogy. And much like the NHL, we see some moves that were made a couple weeks ahead of the trade deadline. You see that in hockey more and more where the deadline will be end of February and like late January you'll see a significant move, and then one early February, and some teams will say, well, we already made our big move then. Adrian Peterson, for example, was the big trade that happened early on, aside from Sammy Watkins when the Bills traded him back in the summer.
Right, yeah. And that was more of a football move, I think. That was more of a guy who just really... he had no place on that roster, that Saints roster. He had no role. He had no carries and no place behind 2 other good running backs. So that was probably more of a football side of it. But really, what it did is it kind of preempted where we were going. I think that maybe may have sparked other GMs to kind of take a look and say, hey, we can move some of these big names. It's okay. There's a comfort factor with it because. A lot of times in the past couple of years, teams have waited for the draft. Waited for free agency to kind of make these moves when the cap dollars and when cap space is really the hot stove topic, right? But it really should be a hot stove topic 12 months a year. GMs should be handling this kind of stuff all year long.
I think, Mike, one thing that I thought of was, you saw Adrian Peterson traded, you saw Jay Ajayi traded. They always say running back is the easiest position to drop into a new team because they don't have that much to learn. Where's my hole? Where am I running? So the running back, I think, situation makes a lot of sense. It's an easy sell to a coach and a coaching staff that I can go get a running back and you'll have them ready within a week or two. But I think the other thing is we've gotten to the world where the NFL, there's so much roster turnover because of injuries that I wonder if coaches have become better at getting guys ready to play quicker, which then leads a general manager to say, hey, I can trade for a guy. And normally in the old days, you'd say he isn't going to be able to help me for a month. It's different now because teams are being forced by injuries to have guys ready to play within a week sometimes.
So 2 things. Number one, I think position definitely matters, and I think you're correct with the running back. I think it's most teams are already running back by committee as it is. So there are limited roles. There are. It's more of a parity in terms of across the league with the running back position. The other point to make here is that really. What you're looking at are teams who maybe the systems aren't so far apart anymore, right? Maybe where 10 years ago you had 5 teams running this system and 5 teams running this system, and there's no way those players could ever make that work in the middle of the year. Maybe right now, it's more of a spread out. It's more of a passing game in terms of how teams are structuring their offenses, at least on that side of the ball. And maybe it's just an easier process for guys to get their head around it if they've got to move in the middle of the year like this.
Let's talk about the AFC East because that's been the most interesting division with trades in the NFL in the last week. And it was started off by the Buffalo Bills. A big trade, Marcell Dareus, a former 3rd overall pick, in the 2011 NFL Draft, traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a measly 6th-round pick. But there's a lot to this on why the Bills moved on from Marcell Dareus. There's the on-the-field stuff. Obviously, if he was performing, they probably would not have traded him or have gotten more than a 6th-round pick. But contractually, there's a whole lot in there that you can look at SpotTrack.com. But, Mike, tell us why this trade made sense for the Bills. What does it mean for the Jags? What's all in there?
Yeah, it's really it's the best of both worlds here. The Bills clearly were running out of favor with Dareus in terms of using him on the field, in terms of the production he was putting up. You know, they had other options for run stoppers on that team, and you saw that kind of last Sunday against the Oakland Raiders. But this was just an overpaid player in a franchise that was kind of moving forward without him, and they were happy to get anything, let alone a 6th-round pick for him. This was a contract dump. That's what this was. This was the Bills had a number in terms of dead cap that they had to take on to get out of this contract. It's significant, but it saves them cap now, it saves them cap next year, and it saves them not having to pay salaries for the next 4 years. So, this was a good move for the Bills in terms of shedding that contract, a good move from a football standpoint, I think, and being able to go younger and cheaper on their defensive line where they need to. And, Jacksonville gets a nice player, in an area where they need to up their run defense right now. They essentially get, a 2-year, $15 million contract with Dareus. After that, they can cut him with no dead cap. So, it's a kind of a win-win for both sides. But certainly, the 6th-round pick is really a throw-in at this point. That Buffalo just needed to get rid of that contract.
How much cap space do the Bills save on this? And how much money, dead money, do they still have?
Yeah, so what they dealt with is they'll clear about $8 million when it's all said and done. A little bit over 5 this year, a little bit over 2 next year, and when you count in the rollover effect, you've got about $8 million for next year, kind of cleared with Dareus. But significant dead cap hits. You're looking at over $10 million in dead cap hits this year and 14.2 next year. So, you're paying an elite cap to not have a guy on your team next year. It's really what the Bills are going to be doing.
But they still come out ahead by getting Jacksonville to take even some of that contract, better than they would have been had they waited to release him at the end of the year.
Right. No more cash paid. They've got the football side of it's an improvement based on what we've heard. And, Jacksonville gets a player for, half the money.
That was the first move in the AFC East. The second move, and Paul mentioned one, so let's talk about the Ajayi trade from the Miami Dolphins to the Philadelphia Eagles. Here's a good running back, young running back, going to a team that you could argue whether or not they need a running back. They need an offensive lineman, but they end up getting a running back instead. And he doesn't make a ton of money.
No, he's on the rookie contract, 3rd year. So, 5th-round pick. You're talking minimum salaries. He's making about $615,000 this year. So you split that up, and the Eagles are on the hook for about $325,000 for this trade. What I thought was interesting is the Dolphins trade him, and then they come out and say, yeah, well, he's washed up anyway. I don't know if you heard this. They said, yeah, this is a 20-something running back with 45-year-old legs. So, not only did they trade him, they trashed him after the fact. So this was maybe the more interesting of the moves in terms of that, because the money is really not that big of a deal.
It brings up an interesting point that you make that and Ajayi had some run-ins with Adam Gase last year. There may be some off the field thing, but I do know for a fact that NFL teams, when they evaluate running backs coming out of college, will track how many carries and touches they've had. That there is a mileage meter, so to speak. And remember, Jay Ajayi at Boise State was a workhorse and I don't know necessarily whether he was a starter from his freshman year or not, but it's interesting that you say that, and would not be shocked that he didn't maybe fit. He maybe wasn't a guy they like dealing with, but maybe they said, you know what are we getting? What's left from this guy? He runs so hard, and he's been banged up before. Maybe there is a little bit of getting rid of him a year before he's done.
So even if there is, what's funny to me is that it's not like he's on a $40 million contract and he was a huge asset to their system. I mean, we're talking less than $1 million, $300,000 this year and $700,000 next year.
Tells me
with
they
no
wanted,
dead cap.
Tells me they wanted him off.
I mean,
the roster.
Philly can pay $300,000 this year, win the Super Bowl, and cut him next year, and for nothing. So I mean, this was they gave up a 4th-round pick, and that's a good win for the Dolphins, really, in terms of what we're discussing here. But yeah, they're sort of trashing a guy that's worth nothing in terms of the cap.
Well, let's hope he has a good financial advisor, given with how, relatively speaking, NFL-wise. I know a lot of you listeners say, was making $600,000. That's an incredible amount of money.
Just.
Right. But in NFL, it's not. It's as you said, low money on that rookie contract. Just an interesting trade in the AFC East. But perhaps the most interesting trade was the New England Patriots trading Garoppolo to the 49ers, getting rid of their backup quarterback, a guy there was a lot of talk about in the offseason, trading him, and someone who is scheduled to make a ton of money next year. Just talk about the Garoppolo trade here, what it means not only for him and what your valuation is of him on the market, because we're going to talk about quarterback valuations too here today, because it's very important. You have your own valuation and where he slots in, but just everything that goes into this trade to the 49ers.
Yeah, this is a monster, and it kind of came out of nowhere here. Obviously, the 49ers are thinking next year. They've been probably doing that since week 2 based on what they saw on the field. But, what they've done is they've given themselves a chance to kind of bring this guy in, evaluate them if they need to. I know that's kind of an interesting side of this too is, how much are they going to let him play right now? How much are they going to see him? Are they going to see enough to have to raise his value, to lower his value? It's an interesting situation for him and for the 49ers, really, in terms of this next contract that's forthcoming here. But really, I mean, he's coming for nothing right now. $430,000 in salary to bring him over right now for that second round pick in return. He will be a free agent after this, so there's options. There's the two big options, obviously, are the franchise tag and a long-term contract. I assume both the team and the player will be leaning towards the long-term contract, just knowing that the franchise tag is going to come in at about $23 million next year, with all the restrictions that come with it. So, when we talk about the long-term contract with Garoppolo, it's extremely tough. It's extremely tough for someone like me to value him. I assume it's extremely tough for someone like the team to evaluate him. Obviously, the agent just wants the money.
Sure,
so
right.
We'll leave them out of it. But
talk to the agent. He's unbelievable. He's been held back by Brady so many years.
Do you really think that the way he performs, however much he plays the rest of the season, has an impact on it? I don't. I think it's a lock. They're going to sign him to a long-term deal, right, Mike?
Here's the thing: it's no win for him. If he comes out and plays great, he's still going to get X dollars, right? Because he's at a point where he knows that team has all the money in the world right now, and he's the most important part of it. So he's going to get the max dollar from the 49ers. If he goes out and lays an egg for 7 weeks, right, then absolutely that could change his value. Guys like me will be running those calculations, and you'll see that number drop. I see it every week with players. So,
that's a fair point. If he's playing quarterback for the Patriots and becoming a free agent because Brady was hurt and he plays for 5 weeks, his value's higher playing in that system, even with some injured receivers for the Patriots, than it would be playing for the 49ers.
Right, and to kind of compare to that, which is where we're going here in terms of the valuation, there's only a few guys who you can kind of look to see kind of where Garoppolo fits. We've got, obviously, Brock Osweiler 2 years ago, who sort of stood in the wings in Denver. He played a little bit. He kind of teased us with, could he be a great quarterback? He kind of looks the part. And Houston gave him $72 million, $37 million guaranteed, And we all know where that stands. The Cleveland Browns now are paying $15 million for him to play for the Denver Broncos again. So,
and he may play for the Denver Broncos again.
It sounds like it.
Yeah,
it sounds like it.
Bad on
Monday.
It
sounds like. From the Patriots' standpoint, this was a clearly money decision to trade Garoppolo, even though it leaves them a little bit, perceived to be weaker at the quarterback position. But obviously, Bill Belichick was not going to let an asset walk out the door and get nothing in return. He's never done that in his career. He wasn't going to do it now.
Can't you just see him sitting there holding his hands, kind of rubbing his hands together, getting nervous? It's he hasn't had a backup quarterback this long in a very long time. They generally get traded by that third year. As soon as they've shown at least a little bit that they can hold up and be the backup to Tom Brady, which really holds enough weight to trade you these days. So, this is the longest that the Patriots have had their backup quarterback in-house. And a lot of us thought it was going to run right to the end. A lot of us thought this was, hitting free agency or the rights would be traded maybe after the season, that kind of thing. So this kind of came out of nowhere. The Patriots, I think, did pretty well in getting, essentially the number 33 overall pick back in the upcoming draft. So, they're in a position where they can take their quarterback there, groom him for a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how Brady fares next year. But this is a situation where both sides should win. They should.
Last question for you on Garoppolo. Do you think there was ever a point when somebody would have been willing to give up a first-round pick for him?
Oh, yeah.
like Cleveland or any, and I'm sure that's what Belichick was holding out for. And think about it. He didn't get a first, but he got a super high second. If he didn't, but do you think there might have been a point in time where a team would have been willing to give up a first to get a quarterback at least with some body of work?
There were reports from people that I trust and follow that this past offseason that there were 2 high draft picks on the table. So whether that's 2 firsts, whether that's a first and a second, whether it's 2 seconds, that appeared to be the offer that was made for Garoppolo this past summer. So in that regard, the Patriots definitely, took a step back. But, we kind of talked about it. The Patriots probably thought they needed, Garoppolo in-house for at least the start of the season, just because even they really didn't know where Tom Brady was going to land this season, right? I mean, 40 is 40.
But he's going to be 41, and he's going to be their quarterback next year, right? That's what this says, is Tom Brady's the quarterback for the New England Patriots.
Yeah, Tom Brady's contract told me that 2 years ago, believe it or not. The way that Brady kind of does this every 2 years, change the contract, what they did is they actually put a decent amount of signing bonus into this last kind of re-up. And there's $14 million in dead cap sitting in next year. So either they were going to let him retire or release him and take that hit, which I can't imagine they'd ever do. Just that's not the franchise to do that. Or he was going to play. So in my opinion, the way the contract was structured, they were always under the impression that 2018 was Tom Brady still.
That's why they told Giselle, stop talking about concussions.
Exactly.
Let's talk more about quarterbacks, because you mentioned Garoppolo. The franchise tag is at least $23 million. You mentioned Osweiler, the $18 million deal in Houston. Glennon, who had $15 million in Chicago. Even Tyrod Taylor's deal in Buffalo, just over $15 million on the bridge deal. Kirk Cousins is interesting when you look at quarterbacks this coming off season. There's him, there's Alex Smith, there's Sam Bradford to talk about, and Garoppolo in the mix. But let's talk about Kirk Cousins, because here's a player that all of us, I want to be Kirk Cousins' agent this offseason, right?
He's played it very well, hasn't he?
I can buy the new truck I'm looking at if I'm Kirk Cousins' agent.
And the bigger picture is that when have we ever talked about guys that we of note that might be available at the quarterback position? Other than Peyton, which was a very unusual situation, when was the last time a legit quarterback hit the free agent market?
Yeah, it's extremely rare. It could go all the way back to Drew Brees. Falling out of favor in San Diego.
And he wasn't a legit quarterback when he was a free agent. I want people to understand that he was not Drew Brees. He was coming off what was at times called a devastating shoulder injury, of which some doctors, including the Miami ones, did not think he would recover from.
That's the same doctor who, by the way, says a guy's knees are 45. No, I don't know.
It might be, but you're right. So we're going back 10 years at least when there was a legitimate quarterback available on the open market, but this year might be different.
Yeah, we're looking at what could be a very unusual offseason in terms of the quarterback position. Not just because there are X number of guys who could be available, but because there's legitimately 12 teams who could need a quarterback. We've got a draft class, we've got free agents, we've got trades, and we've got Kirk Cousins, which yesterday's move with Jimmy Garoppolo only made him look better, right? Because now if a few of these guys get to free agency, he is going to be the standout number one option in terms of the best available. So, we've done our work on evaluating him for the last 3 years, and Washington's kind of squashed that with these franchise tags. But this is a guy that is right near or at the top of the charts in terms of our evaluations. He stands at $27 million right now, which ties Matthew Stafford's contract for the most in the league. So, the stats have always been there. The production's always been there. This is just a guy that really just needs a long-term deal, and I'm not positive he gets it. I'm not positive.
I think the jury's still out on him a little bit, honestly, and just in my opinion, he's put up good numbers. Again, it's all relative to what you have or don't have, but he hasn't taken that team to a lot of heights that people thought he could and would, and I think that's why the Redskins have been hesitant to sign him to a long-term deal, because I don't think they know whether he's really the guy.
I blame it all on Deuce Gruden right now. From the strength coach. I just want to find a way to work Deuce Gruden.
Dude, I thought you were talking like Gruden number 2, which would be his brother Jay.
No, it's it's John Skitt.
Right?
Yes, is
who's
jacked.
working for? Yes, I saw him on the sidelines. Yes.
Anytime we can work Deuce Gruden into, what's his valuation on SpotTrack.com?
Yeah, we're dropping the ball on that one actually.
All right, but no, seriously, what Paul was mentioning about Kirk Cousins.
Here's what I think about Kirk Cousins. They've been willing to pay him $20 million for a 1-year deal. They've been willing to pay him $24 million for a 1-year deal. I can't sit here and say they won't pay 28 for a 1-year deal.
I think they will.
And that's what the transition tag would be, which is essentially like sending him to restricted free agency next year. If they do that, the numbers would be insane. We're talking about 3 years and $73 million for Kirk Cousins.
Wow.
Which, if you're going to pay that, he better be a good quarterback, right? You've got to think he's a good quarterback.
He's a good quarterback. I don't know that he's better than that.
Here's where I have to step in, though, right? Because I'm the cap guy here. That's how I look at this. What you're doing is killing your cap every year.
Because it's such a big chunk.
You're putting one salary, cash and cap, on your roster every single year. So where you may think Cousins hasn't been able to take them to the next level, I think Cousins' salary has thwarted their ability to sign the proper players. I mean they had to dump their wide receiving core this year.
So why have they been unwilling to help their cap situation by signing him to a long-term deal? Are they worried that if they sign him to a long-term deal and he never gets better than what he is, and they've got to look to replace him, they're on the hook? Is that what the Redskins' thinking has been?
Here's the thing. We kind of talked about this in our last episode. These 5-6-year contracts are never 5-6-year contracts. They're 3. So this is going to be year 3 next year. So had they signed him to a 5-year, $120 million deal, 2 years ago, like we all kind of thought they would, we'd be at the breaking point right now. We'd be at a position where they could probably get out of this contract if they needed to. So it's questionable. It's questionable. The only way I can see this being relevant for them and worth it is, does Kirk Cousins need that kind of motivation? Is he a guy that needs a 1-year deal? Does he need to be, on the cusp of getting tossed out of town, to kind of need that kick in the butt to be a great player?
Does he need to play mad?
Yeah.
Does he need to play mad at the organization?
And I'm not saying that's a bad philosophy, and I'm not saying that's a philosophy other teams shouldn't take, but I don't think I'd take it with the quarterback. I think that's just too important of a position. You've got a guy who can clearly win. I mean, he's won playoff games. He can win, So this is a guy, and you're paying him a ton of money already. It's not like you're, in a situation with the Bills and Tyrod Taylor, and you're kind of lowballing just to kind of get through this thing and see where you go. They're paying him top dollar year after year here, and they look willing to do it next year too.
Final thing on Kirk Cousins, and final thing here on NFL quarterbacks, because we've got our cap fact and contract of the week to get to. Does this work out better for Kirk Cousins financially, signing these the 1-year deals, the tags? So you mentioned over 3 years, it's been over 70-some-odd million. Does it work out better for him financially?
It's comparable. I mean, if he is to get a transition tag and pull in $73 million over 3 years, you're talking about that's top 3 money in terms of the league. I mean, you're talking that's Matthew Stafford broken down year by year is really what it is. So, like I said, it's working out for him. But if the Redskins were willing to do this, why not just do it? Why not just do it on a 5-6 year deal? Spread out your cap a little bit. Make life easier for you to bring in some more weapons for the guy.
All right, great stuff. You can look at the Redskins' entire salary structure and where they could have used some receivers that they let go for Kirk Cousins.
Today's Cap Fact.
Okay, Mike, for our cap fact, we get a question on Twitter from @SlowRunner.
That's my handle.
Yeah, I've seen you run. That's accurate. His question, Mike, is how does a 5th-year qualifying offers work in the NBA free agency in regard to restricted free agents, and how can one become unrestricted early?
Oh, everybody knows this one.
Yeah, right? Surface stuff here.
Great question.
Yeah, really nice. I kind of laid it out in a couple of parts here. So first of all, what is the qualifying offer, right? Generally speaking, in terms of how the other sports work, it's kind of a mix between an arbitration in baseball, maybe a franchise tag in football, and really restricted free agency as well. It's kind of a combination of all those things. There's a lot of moving parts, so we'll kind of break it out here. So what does it mean if you get a qualifying offer, right? Last year, the Washington Wizards have a great player, Otto Porter Jr. His rookie contract was up. They obviously didn't want to see him walk for nothing, so they slapped a qualifying offer on him, essentially making him a restricted free agent. What does that mean? It means he's under contract for about $6 million. He signs that offer. Any team in the league can make an offer sheet, and the Washington Wizards have a certain amount of time to be able to match that offer sheet, and then he either plays for the new team or for the Washington Wizards. He was made an offer by the Brooklyn Nets. Washington matched that offer. He's still with the Wizards this year. So that's kind of the process of how the qualifying offer starts and finishes in terms of, a player that signs it. What happens if he doesn't sign it? That's a whole different animal. If he doesn't sign the qualifying offer and October 1st comes around, essentially he's kind of floating in air as a restricted free agent, right? Teams can still make offer sheets to this player, but he no longer can play on that salary, on that qualifying offer that was made to him. That's gone. It's thrown out the window. It's garbage. He can either negotiate with the current team, wait for an offer sheet and sign that, or he sits out for the rest of the season and his rights remain with the current team. So it's a tough situation for the player if he doesn't want to sign that offer sheet, and we really don't see that happen too often. And the last part of this is how does that $6 million for Otto Porter come about in terms of the qualifying offer? It's a real complicated structure, but it's based on the draft. It's based on where you're drafted in your rookie season. So your top 10 picks have a percentage of their last year's salary that turns into a qualifying offer. So in his case, it was like 125% of last year's salary becomes his qualifying offer for the 5th year. So it slides up and down. And the only really difference that can come about with the numbers in terms of how that salary is structured is if you're hurt, if you don't produce, those kind of things matter. And that's where the Major League Baseball's arbitration kind of comes into this. Your next year's salary is based on how you played or if you didn't play the year before. So there's a lot of moving parts. We kind of keep up with this in the offseason for the NBA, especially with a lot of different things happening in terms of big salaries. So, we'll have plenty on this in terms of, research articles and tweets and things like that. So kind of keep forward with us next year and we'll make this clear.
Great question from @SlowRunner. Great way to get questions in and answered here on the podcast or on Twitter is @SpotTrack, SPOTRAC at Twitter.
Time now for the contract of the week.
All right, contract of the week is very noteworthy because of suspension. The on again, off again, now on again, Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, we think he's suspended again, but we'll see what happens Sunday. Yeah, so reports from last night, the judge handed down the case. He is back on suspension, so he will be suspended for 6 games. So we'll take a look at what that means in terms of finances, and it's pretty substantial. I mean, for a top number 1, first round pick, what comes with that first round contract are significant base salary guarantees. And the deal is, any kind of suspension for drugs, for PEDs, for off-field incidences, and for this kind of situation, those guarantees void. So yes, he's going to lose around $2 million in signing bonus and game checks for the 6 games missed. But more importantly, he's set to void over $8 million in base salary guarantees for the next 2.5 seasons because of this incident, because he's been suspended for an off-the-field incident. So, it's a situation where it could work in his favor, it could not work in his favor. And what I'm saying here is, we kind of talked about it with J.H.I. and running backs as a whole. There's a threshold in terms of where teams want to be with these running backs and these knees and their longevity in terms of how much they want to run the workhorse. And really, this could benefit Ezekiel Elliott in the long run if in his rookie contract, when he's making good money but not great money, that he's taking a few games off here, right? That the knees are getting a rest. Certainly the Cowboys are going to be no better for it. Certainly his stats won't be any better for it. But this guy's done enough to kind of say, I'm a dynamic player in the league. I'm certainly worth a second contract. And when that contract comes now, he's going to have a significant amount of, knees, available, where guys like Le'Veon Bell, who, just got franchise tagged with a nice $12 million salary, but the Pittsburgh Steelers have been running him into the ground for 2.5 years now. I mean, this is a guy who catches the ball, runs the ball. He's on pace for 450 touches this year, which is top 3 all time based on, something I read on Twitter yesterday. This is a situation where, guys like that, they're never going to get the big paycheck. When those kind of stats come up, and teams see that and they understand that the threshold is 30 years old and X number of carries based on what they've done in the past couple of years, this could favor Ezekiel Elliott when that second contract comes around and he's a little bit fresher and maybe a little younger in terms of, comparing himself to other players. So, the money might work out for him in the long run.
One quick question about Ezekiel Elliott. Does the money void because of clauses that come into play when you get suspended, or does it have to do with playing time or performance? Like what creates the void of that $8 million?
Yeah, it's the suspension.
Is that standard in a lot of contracts?
Almost all of them. It would be hard-pressed not to. Actually, Marcel Darius had a situation where his suspension did not void his guarantees. Otherwise, the Bills would have had a lot easier time trading him.
There you go.
But this is an off-the-field incident of this magnitude. Once that suspension comes down from the league, the contract guarantees void. So that's a tough loss for him if things go wrong the next couple of years.
You had me thinking real quick on saving the knees. Like Le'Veon Bell waited through training, didn't go to training camp. Wisely.
The same thing.
Yes, right. Probably trying to save himself some reps and wear and tear, and not having to play preseason games where an injury could occur. And it's the old. I think Bruce Smith used to do this with the Buffalo Bills back in the day. A little hamstring injury in training camp and not have to go through the drills. You may see more and more players do that.
More of that there, and we've already started seeing it in the college game. When running backs know that they're ready for the next level,
yep.
I mean, you're going to start seeing guys take some days off for sure.
Running back second contracts are incredibly interesting for the reasons that you talked about, because it's become almost a disposable position around the league where just get me a young guy, draft him in the 3rd, 4th round. I will run him for 3 years and go get me another one. Second contracts because a lot of them have not worked out for teams that have given big second contracts to running backs.
You're right. It's something to watch in the next couple of years, and especially knowing now that Le'Veon Bell couldn't even get one, right? I mean, this guy was the most dynamic player in the last 10 years in terms of that position, in terms of receiving and rushing. So, I'm sure he's happy with his $12 million salary right now, but in terms of how that's changed the running back market, he didn't do what we thought he was going to do in terms of resetting that, that number for running backs going forward. So maybe Ezekiel Elliott is a guy who can do that, can get another big contract, a LaShawn McCoy type contract, who's really the last guy standing in terms of a long-term running back contract. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic in terms of, the committees of running backs, how much they're getting used, when they're going to be washed up, what is that age threshold, what is that carries threshold, and, will a long-term second contract even come for these guys?
A lot of great stuff on the National Football League with the trade deadline, with the quarterbacks coming up this offseason. We just finished up talking about Ezekiel Elliott and running backs. You can look at all the running back contracts. You can look at any position, any contract by position at SpotTrack.com. You can look at all the teams, where things fit in, dead money, cap money, cash money. It's all explained. SpotTrack.com. For Mike Giannetti, Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvester. Thanks for listening.